In this video, we're going to understand how animals get their food and more specifically how animals find and track their food. Now, before I tell you how animals track their food, we need to first have a basic understanding of what do we mean by finding and what do we mean by tracking. Now, to understand this, let's take a very simple example of the hide and seek game, which we've all played. Now let's assume we're playing a hide and seek game where all your friends are hiding and you need to seek them out. When you start your journey to look for them, you realize that some of them are hiding in a very obvious places where you peek around a corner and you see your friend crouching behind the sofa. Now here you realize that she's right behind the sofa. Now there are still a couple more friends hiding. But now in their case, you need to start looking for them. So you hear them giggle and you follow the sound through all the rooms until you tag your friend. Now, what you've just done is that you are tracking and you are trying to find your friend. While in this case, you were able to find her pretty easily. So, with respect to animals, what do we understand by finding and tracking food? Finding food is when an animal realizes that food is around. While on the other hand, tracking is a process that closes the gap between actually finding the food and noticing the food. So, how exactly does an animal find food? How does it realize that food is around? That is where tracking as a process comes into the picture. So, first they go out on a lookout for food, after which they then collect the food using certain tools. Now, this particular video focuses mainly on how animals track their food. So, let's understand this aspect in great detail. Now, just the other day, I was watching a TV show where they were playing a guessing game where the participants were blindfolded and they had to guess what food item was given to them. Now, notice how they are blindfolded, which means now they cannot see. But yet, I noticed that some of these participants were able to easily give the answer. Then, when I focused more, I saw that, of course, they could not see what food item was given to them, but that didn't stop them. Some of them were smelling the food item, some of them were touching it to see what kind of texture was there, and some of them even tasted it. And this helped them understand what was being given to them. Now, what they effectively did was they used their senses. So, senses help us understand the world around us. So, if we're able to see beautiful fireworks, the shapes, the colors, it is because of our eyes. We are able to hear beautiful music and sound and people talking because of our ears. And we are able to taste the delicious food that we make at home and what we experience outside thanks to our tongue. And of course, we're able to smell the beautiful flowers thanks to our nose. And finally, we're able to touch and sense the world around us thanks to our hands. So, these five senses work together in order to help us explore, in order to help us play, and mainly keep us safe, right? So, this right here ensures that it keeps us safe from any kind of danger that might be out there. Now, this is, of course, with respect to us. But it's not just us. Animals also have senses, and some of them use these senses in order to protect themselves from danger, to explore, and even to find food. Now, there are about 8.7 million species of animals, and we know that they're classified into herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores based on the kind of food that they eat. But have you ever wondered how exactly they track this food? Let us understand this by looking at a very simple example. Now, I'm sure we've all seen dogs. Some of our friends might have pet dogs at home, or when we're on a journey to school, I'm sure we would have seen street dogs. Now, have you noticed how sometimes these dogs just wander around in circles? They're sniffing a lot and they're smelling everything in their path, and it's quite intense the way they sniff. So, have you ever wondered why do they do that? Well, it's because their nose is telling them that food is around even if they can't see it. So, just like how we use our senses, animals also use their senses. And they use their senses in order to locate food. So, some of them use sight, some of them use smell, some of them use sound, some of them use taste and touch. And in all of these cases, they use their senses in order to locate food. As a matter of fact, some animals rely more on one sense than the other. And we see that in some cases, one of these senses become very, very strong for them. That is why when we look at a dog is sniffing quite intensely, right? Where it is able to, it is not able to see the food, yet it is able to sniff it. So they wag their tail, they sniff on the ground, they try to follow the smell like it's reading a map. And sometimes they even go in circles, which is why you would notice that their nose is found moving. Then, along with that, they'd be wiggling their tails, they walk in circles, and sometimes they get very excited and they start barking as well. Now, this is because we see that dogs tend to have a couple of special structures. And we see that it makes them more sensitive to smell when compared to, let's say, us humans. Which is why we see that dogs tend to have enhanced smell, which is crucial for their survival. They're able to understand where they are, if somebody is going to come and attack them, right? And they're able to also detect certain diseases just with the help of smell. So, therefore, we see that these senses don't just help them in tracking food, but it also helps them in other ways. Now, let's understand more about this because it seems very interesting. So, let's take a couple more examples and investigate and see how their senses help them track and find food. So, first up, we have the snake here with us. Now, when we talk about snakes, right, we see that snakes are mainly carnivores, which means they feed on other animals. Now, when they look out for food, right, they need to find other animals. And in order to do that, interestingly, they don't use noses like the way we do. So, therefore, whenever they need to find food, they actually stick their tongue out. And when they stick their tongue out, they start to taste the air. Can you believe that? Snakes have the ability to taste the air and pick up scent particles. Where we see that there is this organ, right? It's just a little bit of a special information. They have an organ called as Jacobson's organ that helps them detect where the food is found. So instead of using their nose to smell, snakes actually use their tongues to smell. So this right here is another way in which an animal uses its enhanced senses in order to find food. Now, just like that, we have bats. Now, bats, on the other hand, we see that they have a wide range of feeding habits, which is why primarily they are omnivores. And in the case of bats, right, bats prefer to sleep during the day and they prefer to find food during the night. Which is why when they find food in the night, right, we see that they're not able to see really well. Of course, because it's pretty dark in the night. So in such cases, they start to make tiny clicking sounds. And when they make these tiny clicking sounds, these sounds echo and bounce back. And often the surface from which it echoes is often the food that it's looking for. And we see that this right here helps them see with their ears, right? So they're able to see with their ears while and catch flying insects even in complete darkness. So, see how these animals are using their senses in a diverse or a unique manner in order to find food? That is something that we're going to look at with more examples. But before I get to other examples, notice how they are actually finding food in the dark. Well, they're not the only ones. There are other animals that find food in the dark, like owls, rats, and even cockroaches. So animals that search for food in the night are or rather find food in the dark and they remain hidden during the day. We call such animals as nocturnal animals. And we see that they are all very interesting examples where they use their special senses in order to track for food. Now next up we have some examples of birds. birds like eagles and vultures. Now, eagles and vultures are again considered to be carnivores, which typically fly at great heights. Now, we're talking somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 meters from the ground, which means they're flying at a height where there's an aeroplane flying very close to them, right? So, at that range, how is it that they're able to find food? Because, firstly, they don't get food in the air. So, they need to come to land in order to find food. Which is why, because they need to come to the land in order to catch their food, we see that they have sharp eyes. And these sharp eyes help them look for food on the ground and then they catch it. So, these are various ways in which different animals tend to use their senses. Now, all animals have senses, it's just that in some animals, these senses are sharper than the others.